Good evening. There's a small sound check. Can everybody hear me? Hello? Yes. Okay. All good. Hi, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to give it another 1 minute or so, see if we get a few more people coming in, and then we're just going to get started. Thank you for those that are already here. If you can hear me, can you please give a thumbs up or anything? Yep, perfect. All right. Okay. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our new schedule. So, for those that haven't seen me yet, I'm TJ from Passend Education. I'm a specialist in highly gifted education and on a mission to make the world better by making gifted kids more happy, autonomous, and successful. We'll be posting this on YouTube later. But seeing that we have a few people in the chat, for those that would love to ask a few questions right as I'm speaking, please do so. I've got about half an hour of topic already prepared, and then I'm going to be going into a bit of a quick fire answering questions because we had a lot of questions in our questionnaire the last couple of weeks. But in the meantime, if you some questions do come up, if you don't want to shout them out, please type something in the chat, and then I'll come to it as soon as I can. And with that, I'm going to be talking a bit about a very difficult topic, which is self-harm. And unfortunately, the far end of self-harm is sometimes something a lot worse, which the YouTube algorithm will not let me say. But basically, we're talking all kinds of self-harm, even the ones that unfortunately end lives. And particularly how giftedness can relate to this and whether they're more susceptible or not. We're going to go a little bit deeper into all this. The reason we're bringing this topic up, just to not make people worried, is we're not doing this because we think that there's kids right now that are on a watch list for us. Although, um, due to a few situations in Malaysia very recently, a lot of the kids that we've been working with have been asking us about this, right? So I thought it might be a good opportunity to basically take some time with you and talk about the risk, but I don't want to cause a panic, right? So because one of the things is giftedness can stack risk when it comes down to it. Now, I mentioned last week a little bit that we did have a question from one of the kids about what would it feel like to unfortunately end your life, and I wanted to go a little bit deeper into why we get some of these requests in the first place, and we have managed to catch quite a lot of kids that are self-harming, even though a lot of other educators were not necessarily aware of this. And one of the reason that we actually get more information from the kids because we build up a bit more trust, particularly because one of our first key foundations of working with our kids is seeing them. Right? We want the kids to be seen and heard, and a big chunk of that is giving them a lot more choice, right? In a lot of things. So when we're talking about happy, um, the most important four elements that make up happiness are physical well-being. If you have a broken arm, you don't tend to feel very happy. Mental well-being. So if chemically things are difficult in your brain, it's sometimes very hard to feel happy. But there's two other elements, which is agency agency is meaningful choice that you can have an impact on, and responsibility. And again, the opposites of those, not having a choice at all, gets people super, super sad. And having no responsibility, means nobody cares about what you're doing, makes people unhappy. The reason why we focus on that first and why we get our kids to really share deep stuff with us is because not many people around them give them that opportunity. School, by its very nature, is a very forced existence. You have to go to school by law. Everybody has to go at the same time, no matter whether you're mentally ready, no matter whether you're physically ready. And that can feel very limiting to a lot of gifted kids. And then a big challenge that gifted kids run into is that they're very, very creative. And most parents, and I want to bring that up, is like even if we looked at the model from Monk's, where he said basically creativity is one of the three major markers for giftedness. Whilst we always say, oh, we want our kids to be creative, there's a whole industry about sending kids to art class, because the idea is if I send my kids to art class, then they're creative. But that's not really what creativity means. Creativity is doing things in ways, or combining things in ways that nobody's ever done before. And that is the global perspective of this. But if a child is technically not aware that somebody else has done the same thing on the other side of the globe, therefore they came up with this thought by themselves, then we could also consider them creative. And during our assessments, we actually spent quite a bit of time figuring out like how creative the kids are. And what we find with a lot of gifted kids is that they're very creative. And that means that they do things very, very differently. And that also means that they get into a lot of trouble, right? So um, there's things that gifted kids tend to do or drift towards that, unfortunately, in certain environments, make them feel like they're not part of it. And that's basically where we're going to start off. So we're here now because giftedness can stack risk, and because we have had a few kids that are unfortunately self-harming. And I think the percentage of kids that I'm working with in my group, so we have almost like 150 kids right now, we have close to 12 kids that are self-harming in some form. And I think that is a much higher percentage than you would need to expect. An element of this, I believe, has a lot to do with the fact that, particularly in Malaysia, we don't have a lot of counseling available to our kids, although a lot of the international schools do have some of it there. But then another thing that I've noticed is that a lot of gifted kids here, and Malaysian kids in general, they don't spend as much time with their parents as they do in the Netherlands, for example. And that's because a lot of you guys work extremely hard. But another thing that I noticed is that the travel time needed to go to school is quite extensive, right? I don't like when I tell people in the Netherlands that it takes an average person sometimes between 40 to a minute to an hour to get to school, they think I'm crazy, because for the Netherlands, that's the other side of the country. That is like, of course, it could take 40 minutes to walk to school, to take a bicycle to school, but 40 minutes by car, they find is very different. And then, unfortunately, or fortunately, a lot of gifted kids, they the time that they spend in the cars themselves, they often have to do a lot of work already, like homework. Some of them are on their phones, you name it. So even though sometimes parents spend time with their kids in the car, it is not really the same kind of quality time that helps the kids open up. So what is risk in this? Like, one thing that is very important is that, like, again, the myth that I've spoken about with a lot of you as parents is that gifted kids are okay regardless, right? So they are okay most of the time, and that is because they look very mature, right? So a lot of gifted kids, when you start speaking to them, they speak above their age. They seem to engage extremely well with certain thoughts. They have very deep kind of thinking. There's often questions about yeah, existential like existence and stuff like that. But like I get a lot of parents that ask me, oh, they ask me questions, what happens after you pass on, and often triggered by deaths in the family. A lot of these things seem very thoughtful and well thought out, and generally speaking, that is kind of what it looks like. Unfortunately, though, a lot of this stuff is often a way to sort of avoid the emotional distress that comes with it. Right. So there's definitely an academic mismatch between how they socially develop and how we perceive them to do in school. And the asynchronous development is really a big risk that we can see here. Um, the other thing is that not all gifted kids are the same, right? So there is versions of giftedness that focus on different parts of their skills. There's differences in how kids grow up because of them having siblings or not. So there's a lot of factors in here that are really hard to sort of make that prediction very easily. What is interesting is when we look academically, like of some work from Liana Hogeveen as well, is that the actual percentage of risk with gifted kids doesn't seem to be that much higher. But there is a statistic that I find very worrying, is that Malaysia itself is extremely high in the global suicide rankings, and also very high in self-harm rankings. So what is going on here? Like I've been trying to dig a little bit deeper into academic research in this, and it's very sparing. So we're going to have to work on some of the things that we know from other countries like the United States, where like research on this topic is done a lot more extensively. Another big thing that we've been running into when we've been talking to the kids that has been really difficult is that particularly with the girls, and obviously like Malay girls, they dress up, covering more parts of their body from a religious perspective. But it also makes it harder for us as educators to sometimes see the signs of self-harm and so on. And that is one of the other reasons that I believe we should be here. Okay, so what are the main risks? So what is the three pathways that can increase risk? So we're going to talk to about like three of them. The first one is perfectionism. The second one is belonging. Belonging. Yeah. Okay. And then we're gonna have, which I'm gonna call happiness in this case, right? And then we're gonna be talking about the last bit here, which is twice exceptionalism. So twice exceptionalism is also known as TE, is when you have giftedness and you have a different kind of, I would say, learning disadvantage. So ADHD and giftedness, or autism and giftedness. And why are the three paths of risks that I think are important today. So we'll start with perfectionism, because one of the things that I've noticed is that when it comes down to any of and unfortunately, the majority of these are girls, although it's definitely not exclusive to girls. I'll tell a few stories about versions of this that I think really reflect this quite well. But perfectionism itself is a very big indicator, and we see like a very heavy correlation between people that self-harm and people that are perfectionistic. So what is perfectionism? So let's define it first. So obviously perfectionism is hold on a sec, Jasper, thank you. Is basically a perfectionism is when you cannot let go of a task and you want to continue working on it, not because your intent is often to finish it, but because you're scared that you will finish it incomplete, or that it will not reach a certain standard that you want. So perfectionism, deep down, is actually a fear of failure. Now, a lot of the things when it comes to gifted education, particularly when it comes to effective time, is around dealing with some kind of fear. And fear of failure is pretty common in a lot of kids. And what we tend to see is what we say is like there's avoidance behavior. So there is something that they end up doing that makes them avoid that fear. So this is a fight or flight response. Generally speaking, when the fight response happens with the kids that we call challenging creative. So these are the kids that will act out. This is also the ones that we see walking around, do impulsive things. So those are the kind of outward displays of fear that are often a little bit easier seen. But particularly with the girls, a lot of these displays of fear end up inside of them, and it's often very hard for us to find out where this sits. Particularly because the idea of fear of failure when it comes from academic perspective is to try and do as good as you can for other people, right? So what we tend to see is that fear of failure is a very extrinsic motivation. That's the big problem that we run into, right? So very self-critical, with the intent to look at like what other people think about what you're doing. And extrinsic motivators are problematic from a lot of perspective. Like extrinsic motivators can create a situation where if there is no extrinsic motivator, nothing will happen. That's one reason why extrinsic motivated people tend to suffer sometimes. If there's no reward, I'm not going to do this. Right. So, and as a parent, we often have like, oh, let's if you do this, I'll give you some candy or things like that. And we always say from a growth mindset perspective is like, do not do these kind of things. Make sure that the focus is on the effort. But for kids that are scared to fail, the extrinsic motivator is often a little bit more complex. It's like it's linked to how they want to do well for their parents. And I understand in this particular situation in Malaysia, there's a lot of social stuff related to this. What I have to say is that I know we've got a few parents from Korea with us here, and the Korean and also the Chinese education system, the Confucius thought on how to get ready for education has had a very big impact on this particular fear of failure. I'll go a little bit deeper into that because this apparently the length of how long this has been going on is thousands of years. And from what I understand, based on what I've been reading, is that basically in the old days, if you wanted to become educated, the cost to get ready for a state exam, to become a government official, was so high that villages would take what the smartest person in that village, and they would pool all their money and time and resources that they could find to allow that person to do a particular exam. And if they passed that exam, they could become an official, which then had a massive impact on the city that they were in or the village they were in, because that person would, I mean, some people would say that it's a form of corruption or not, but they would probably pay back that effort and money put in. The flip side of that is that if that person failed, like everybody's hope and money was riding on it. So that meant like a whole generation would lose access to financial benefit in some way. And a lot of and it was almost considered a good thing at that point to end it all. And a lot of suicides are linked to this. So when you look at like countries that have that kind of Confucius background, that kind of like suicide is very, very, very common. And even though we don't necessarily send a single person from a village to go to school, unfortunately, a lot of particularly the countries that have been developing very quickly, and again, I'll come back to the Chinese communities, the Korean communities, as well as the Japanese communities. Unfortunately, they have less children, right? So often there's only one child, maybe two, and as a result, there's a lot of pressure on this child because the sort of that old village dynamic is sort of still present, where both grandparents, sets of grandparents, and the parents themselves pour all their money, time, and effort into this one child. And if something doesn't go right, then that's it. So we see in Korea specifically, after the state exam that they have, that suicide shoot up. And I know for a fact that that's also the case here in Malaysia, where people sort of fail out of school, or things don't go quite the way that they want to. Unfortunately, there's a lot of danger there. All right, so and that perfectionism, that idea that I have to get all these good grades, is not just driven by them themselves. It's very common with non-gifted kids. But what is really difficult is that perfectionism is kind of one of these overexcitabilities that a lot of gifted kids run into. So what you have here is that the way that school is approached has like a higher tendency to create this kind of existential crisis when things don't go quite the way that they need to. But at the same time, being gifted actually makes that just worse. So these shame spirals where, like, okay, I thought I was going to do it, particularly if you're being hyped up, it's like, oh, you can do it, you've had A stars, and basically this what we call these gifted burnouts, which is basically when they run into that learning wall, like when they realize that they need to work harder for things than they thought they need to, and that all of a sudden they go from I thought I'm the smartest in class to I'm not. And this particular fear, when I've see that happen, when some of the kids realize, oh, this is what's going on, the actual response to it is very, very vivid. Like I've had a boy that basically seems quite normal, like very like I mean, some people would call it arrogant because he was always the smartest in class. He wasn't very good at controlling his emotions, so he'd get into trouble with that, a lot of stuff. But he basically got into situations where um, he started seeing that other kids in the classes were starting to outperform him because they were working harder, because they were making a little bit cleverer choices on what things to focus on. They would commit to a task, finish them, and he started to fall behind to the point that it was kind of undeniable. And when he in a session with him one-on-one, while we are having that discussion, you saw him realize this, and he would just almost like fall asleep, like narcoleptic style fall asleep, where like his brain just went like, okay, no, we're not going to deal with this. So that's how heavy this stuff can be. Um, but, and this is really dangerous, like a lot of the girls that we work with, they do all this stuff inside and then they hide all of it. And it's very hard to find them at that point. So so this kind of fear of failure, together with the overexcitability of um, perfectionism in gifted kids, leads to a lot of self-harm. The next path that is real problematic is the belonging and happiness part. Now, whenever we see in suicide tends to go up when the social cohesion of groups start to go down. So it is very common that like when the groups start to fall apart, and like particularly how kids sometimes relate to each other, like we've seen a lot of difficulties around the pandemic, right, where people didn't manage to get the groups going as well as we have, and we still don't quite understand how much of an impact all of that has had on us. But belonging and happiness is so an important thing that, like, if you don't feel like you fit in, it can really create like a negative spiral, right? So these negative spirals again are very emotionally driven. So the emotional overexcitabilities are again going to have a massive impact on this. And when you look at like I don't fit in, like then often it's like I don't fit in, therefore I'm going to stop doing this kind of stuff, or I'm not going to go to parties because I don't fit in. Then there's less practice socially, and then it becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the whole idea of incels is a big part in the US and Europe at the moment, where particularly young men tend to withdraw themselves into computer games and other kind of situations, and like they become very isolated from people around them. And then you start seeing them either like latching onto other groups. So there's a lot of tied to them, getting into right wing kind of situations or extreme left wing, because it can go both ways. We know things like furries and other kind of stuff, like all these kind of groups that become very interesting to look for. So this belonging is often at that point, it's like gets replaced even by stuff online, which then it's kind of a pseudo belonging, because it's people that you don't really know, right? But yet we do bind our happiness to. We see this even with like people that are famous. Like if people are famous on the screen and you see them for a couple of hours, we emotionally respond as if we know those people, but they of course don't know the people watching at all, right? So like certain behaviors back might not correlate with what you would expect. So what is really problematic is when you have a social group. The idea with a social group is that it's not just a one-way street. The idea of it being social is that you learn from each other, and there is a bit of a give and take, and that is important, because if there is no give back from the group that you're trying to belong to, then it sometimes feels like you are not part of that group, and then you're starting to get to that, okay, well, do I matter kind of thing, right? So the belonging and happiness, there's a nihilism is really a big part of this nihilism, right? That is basically going to be like one of the things that a lot of kids are going to end up in. And I like to bring nihilism into my groups when I do effective time with them, because it is a very common philosophy. It exists online, and it's easy for the kids to find. It is a very tempting one, because logically speaking, a lot of the stuff makes sense. And it leads you down this rabbit hole of like, okay, nothing matters kind of thing. So when you're not helping the kids understand that nihilism exists, that there is kind of like a logical like fallacy that you have to go through to come to a certain kind of conclusion, and then decide whether you want to be part of this world or not. Like, so nothing matters, therefore everything matters kind of idea. And a lot of people find faith in that kind of stuff. So I find a lot of people with religious backgrounds have a little bit of an armor against this, which is great. The only thing is, with one of the things that I see with gifted kids is a lot of them challenge their parents' ideas and ideals on certain kind of religions. That's like, because the stories that we sometimes say, they have some logical fallacies in them. And this is why theology is kind of like a debate on its own. You have to study it, you have to understand what is symbolism, what is it needed for, and it all depends in which religion you are in, of course. So and particularly because we're in Malaysia, I want to be very mindful that I definitely never will tell a child you should believe or not in a certain faith or anything else. Simply because I think that journey and coming to that conclusion is the reason why that is important. So if you're religious yourself, having your gifted children find that out for themselves is actually kind of important. And that's why having faith without the depth of actually finding your faith cannot necessarily be the same, because sometimes what happens is if they break from their faith, that can also trigger an existential crisis. So the important part in this is that don't think that if you have religious children that you're immune from them self-harming and so on. All right, so that is the nihilism and the don't belong. And again, I think we're going to go into a little bit deeper on what you would need to do to help with this. The last one is twice exceptionalism, and I wanted to bring this up because I have a significant amount of twice exceptional kids in my classes, at one of much higher percentage than you would expect from gifted kids. But the twice exceptional kids, they really suffer in Malaysia from not having a lot of help Like one, their diagnosis is really poorly done, unfortunately, by a lot of people. I find it always very interesting that we can that clinical doctors have the ability to establish ADHD. Um, in Holland, that would never be a thing. You would definitely have to have somebody with the right kind of training to make those kind of judgments. So there's way too many people that get diagnosed wrongly. But then one of the problems is that twice exceptionalism, often the giftedness can hide one of the other, right? So a very good example of twice exceptional kids that really suffer, unnecessarily so, are kids with dyslexia. Like the numbers vary, but like some people say between like 1 in 10 to like maybe even 1 in 4, but like I think 1 in 10 seems to be a bit more safer number. Suffer or run into dyslexia. And actually, everybody does it like when you're born. Like the way our brains develop is that like we sort of go through reading, and reading is a very conceptual idea of things. It's not, it's amazing. Reading is amazing, but our brains don't naturally think in books, right? So we need to learn how to do this. And with dyslexia, the kids that struggle with this, their brains just either develop slower in this process or they develop differently, which has advantages and disadvantages, like very important. But what happens is that like often with gifted kids and dyslexia is that the giftedness like hides the dyslexia, and or vice versa. So because of the dyslexia, they don't score as high on IQ tests. So they end up looking like normal children, but they do suffer from all the overexcitabilities and all the challenges and everything else that a normal gifted kid would suffer from or struggle with. But nobody knows why, and this is kind of dangerous. So, with a lot of twice exceptional kids, the biggest problem is a lack of information. um and this is not just towards like the professionals, like this is also towards the kids. Um like in Malaysia, there's a lot of stigma around twice exceptional kids, where I've seen parents that are in absolute denial about the fact of this. It's not on us to say, okay, your child is um twice exceptional or not. So these things are difficult, right? So like we don't want to step on people's toes, and also uh, most educators themselves are not clinical psychologists. But one of the things here is that because of the lack of info, what tends to happen with these kids is that they start to, they know things are not going the same way. They know things are not feeling right. And I've had kids say something as simple as, like when I don't like reading books because the letters dance in front of my eyes. And these are then 11, 12-year-old kids, and you go, how come that has never shown up at any point? And these kids just went like, okay, that means I'm just not good at reading. And unfortunately, like if we would have helped them properly, they would have probably not had any issues with it. But because they're there and because they've been building up bad habits as a result, or difficult habits to try and overcome the challenges school throws at them, they they think it's their fault. So there's a lot of self-blame. So not all different versions of twice exceptionally have the same kind of risks. There's two that are really difficult. Like the first one being autism. Particularly autism, there's a lot. There's such a range of what autism could be like, but there's a lot of behaviors. And very common version of autism has a difficulty with linking empathy. So how you feel about how you feel about things and how others potentially feel about it to each other, and therefore can't really match the right kind of behavior to the right kind of situation. But you can learn through trial and error, like what is right and what is wrong. But that doesn't mean that it makes it easy to immediately transpose on situations you've never run into, for example. Whereas like a lot of social behavior is about anticipating what other people are going to do so that you're more likely to act proper according to the group. And for a lot of autistic kids, this is very hard, and they need a lot of help with this. And you can actually get them like really close to the point where other people might not even know that they potentially are on the spectrum. but they struggle. And the same is with ADHD, like particularly because with ADHD, particularly, there often is a lot of like shouting and frustration there. ADD, similar so, although there's often a little bit less shouting and more like daydreaming kind of thing. But the biggest problem that particularly ADHD and autism struggle with is that they tend to mask. So what they do is they mask their emotions towards everybody else. And masking seems like a good thing from the outsider's perspective. Well, they're just acting properly. So I've had one girl that like can't work in groups without getting completely anxious and frustrated. It's the amount of information that comes at them, not being able to link. Like if you're trying to anticipate what one person is saying, that's a lot for her. But doing it for 5 people at the same time, under time pressure, where like a particular objective needs to be done, and then at the same time she is obviously often the one that sees the solution in a very creative way, that the others don't understand, and she doesn't have the skills necessarily to explain it in a way that gets people on board. To her, that is extremely hard, even if she's succeeding at it. So when she's doing this, like trying to mask that behavior, teachers will go, yeah, she's great, she was like doing everything else. And then I get her one-on-one, and then she tells me like, today I couldn't anymore. And this particular girl that I'm working with is self-harming, right? So whenever this happens too much, she would self-harm at the back of it. So the masking is extremely dangerous, because masking is sort of like taking all that negative energy and keep bottling it up inside. Now that has some other effects. So when you mask, that leads again to burnout. And burnout itself, of course, has a lot of has two sides. Like, for one, we've been treating burnout in this almost like a mental illness, and a lot of stuff that we do in psychiatry and psychology is towards like helping them with this. But we're starting to come around towards that, like burnout is actually more physical. And basically a bit more like an imbalance of certain kind of hormones in your brain. But the mental challenges that you run into from masking can exacerbate this, and therefore, like when you talk about kids that start self-harming, like self-harm is like the ultimate form of control, right? So when you burn out, you don't feel like you're in control, and you can't bring up the right kind of energy at the right kind of time. You feel overwhelmed most of the time, and you physically can't actually do anything anymore. And it feels extremely desperate. So you get anxiety, panic attacks from this. So you can sometimes like even we think that even the cutting itself, for example, creates some kind of feeling. So you feel numb, and then you start coming there's like, oh, this feels good, I have feeling again, because up before that I didn't feel anything at all. And burnout comes quicker if they don't have any choice, right? So like twice exceptionalism, like this whole loop happens almost with all the self-harming kids. But for twice exceptionalism, the masking is almost induced. There's a few therapies that basically just build on this, because the only aim is to try and make them function within society, and that is really, really difficult. So for us, there's a few things that we need to talk about, like how do we help them? All right. So what can we do to help? Um, so the first one is actually like DBT, or skills-based therapy. Like skills-based therapy. And why does this work? So skills-based therapy is about taking meaningful skills that the individuals want to work on and developing those. And why does that work? Because you would think, like, if they're burned out, if they feel they have no control, why is that so important? Well, first of all, if you feel overwhelmed and feel that you have no choice, the way that you can trick your brain into thinking that you have choice is actually adding smaller things that you can do. Or even adding like a little bit of I can choose what to engage with at what time. So what I do, because obviously during the exam periods, this is very, very common. It's one of the other reasons I want to talk about it now. But basically, with skills-based therapy, what we're saying is like, okay, we take something that matters to them, like something that they think is important. And then we give them the ability to engage with that and become better at it. So normally these skills will have multiple things that you have to do in a certain kind of order, or you can choose a little bit like what you want to do, and then you can just build up a few of these skills, and you get this, all of a sudden you start ticking off things. So you're starting to have agency, that which means choice in something that you can meaningfully affect, so that you can do something with. Now, ideally, they're skills that also have some positive effect on people around them, right? So what kind of skills you choose, or that we coach the kids into choosing, is really, really important. Which is why, again, like if you want to talk to your kids and you want to find out what's going on, um, like if you come, a lot of them assume that you're just trying to get them to do what you want. And I say this to a lot of parents when they come, say, yeah, I want them to do this particular skill. Like one of the questions for today was, my girl doesn't want to go to Malay language class unless it's with a friend, right? And the thing with there is that, like, obviously what is happening here is this girl wants to go to see the friend, and the Malay is just a vehicle for this. Whereas for the parents, it's like, no, like I want her to learn Malay. Now, the question you should be asking yourself is, why do you want her to learn Malay? Right? So is that because it's a requirement for the school? Is that because it's you want them to learn an extra language? Or is it something else? Because why you want to do it makes a big difference. Because maybe Malay is not necessary. It could be a different language. Now, I'm a big proponent of actually learning Malay with our young kids, because I think it will help with unity in the country and all that kind of stuff. So I think what you can do is say, okay, how can I create a situation where they would need this particular skill, the Malay itself, and then have a natural consequence of, if they can do this, they can do something more interesting. And what that is, that you have to talk to the kids. Like it's so important in this that you have to talk to the kids, right? But skills-based therapy works really well, particularly because it gives them a feeling of control. And one example of a girl that I worked with is that, like, she said that she used to do crochet, and then she got like a little bit like sidetracked with it. And then I said, you know what, in our sessions, why don't we learn how to do certain like stitches of crochet together, and then use that as an opportunity for you to sort of get some grounding going. And that actually helped immensely. We didn't actually do that much more different, but that was the main focus of our sessions. And she went from yeah, very, yeah, like sad and quiet, to now actually doing quite well in her A levels in terms of social structure, and also with her exams, by the way. That was really good. Now, the next one is the family involvement. So family involvement can take a lot of different things. Like, I hope you guys have had the chance to look at the family meeting. The family meeting is a really, really important tool for you to let the kids feel like they're part of the whole, that their opinions matter, that we get to brainstorm together. This is really important when it comes to solving problems that they have, and that is a good start, right? So how you then build that communication up as a parent is also around like what you need to model towards your partner, or anybody else that is involved with the actual raising of the kids in the house. So involve everybody with this. And the thing that I normally I say with this is, try to be a bit clever about this. So bring a different child to go shopping every week. Like there's lots of chores and things that we tend to sort of say, okay, the kids don't have to be involved with it, but you'd be surprised if you sort of involve them with it, how much they would enjoy that. And then the ride there, and the right back actually gives you an opportunity to talk to your children. So that is the family involvement. That is very important. But you also need a safety plan, right? So one of the things here is that if you see any of these particular symptoms, right? So the first one is just questions, right? So like, oh, what does it feel like to die? Or mom, I feel so like, can I end it? Or things like that. Like these kind of questions, if you see them, you need to basically take it to somewhere else, which means you need to start thinking about, okay, what is your safety plan? Now, if you've never had these kind of questions before, that's great. But I would suggest that maybe you and your partners sit down and have a think about, okay, what would happen? What would we want to do to respond to these kind of triggers? So the questions is one. One thing I tend to see, and it's very common, that the kids start wearing long sleeve clothes or really thick clothing in situations that isn't really practical. And of course, there's like these online groups where people would say, "Oh, we do that because I want to be part of it." So it's always kind of tricky. But like a lot of kids that self-harm, they're sort of aware that this is the case, and almost all of them, I see them working out with big dark sweaters. I sometimes go outside with the kids to purposely see whether they actually take them off, because if it's super hot, who's going to wear a sweater? And these things, yeah, they basically tell me something. The other thing is like withdrawing. Yeah. Um, so withdrawing is a really important part. So where they used to be super chatty, they now become really withdrawn. And you need to be a bit mindful at this because like withdrawing is one of those things where, like they become teens and they don't necessarily want to listen to you as often as they normally did. And big reason for that is that they start avoiding questions that they think are you just testing them how they're doing. Right. So you need to start. So, if you see withdrawing, the first question you need to ask, like, am I personally like asking questions for my own benefit or for their benefit? So, like, work on your own empathy in this. But if they are like withdrawing and you can see that they're no longer engaging with some friends that they had, this is the kind of thing that you need to do. So what does a safety plan look like? Well, there's lots of versions of this, and I don't want to like say this is the only steps you need to do, because unfortunately, this is where you as a family would have to go sit down and go, okay, what is it that I would want to do? And my suggestion would be to take your partner, have a discussion of what that safety plan would look like, and then see if in the family meetings that you have, if you can bring it up as a potential thing to do. The trick that I would say, if you want to make sure that this is easier to do, try to have something happening that like distracts from it. So if I want to have this particular kind of conversation, what I do with my kids is I give them clay or something to draw that will help them keep their hands busy, so that one, there's a reason why you're still doing something for about half an hour, and then the conversation can come up a little bit more naturally. This is the kind of stuff we do in our effective time in our classes all the time. This is where the question, how does it feel killing yourself, by one of my students came from, because we have a big jar where we can just pull these things out. And again, the setup is very straightforward. Either we draw something together, we make something with clay. I mean, family food used to be a kind of a thing too, except that you have to your mouth is full when you do so. So I like tinkering with things, making stuff, which is why festivities that are coming up might be a good opportunity to do this. Like make some of your own ornaments, for example. It's a great excuse to do some stuff, make that a bit of a tradition, and then have that conversation while you're there. Right? What is important is that bullying is a factor in this. So people that are being bullied, but ironically also people that bully themselves, often there's something there that, like, a very big fear of failure, like social failure. Basically, bullying, like, are your kids being bullied? Like, you need to step into that, and not necessarily on just stopping it from happening. Because when you step in as a parent and just say, okay, I'm just going to deal with the bullies themselves and let school sort it, the sense of hopelessness that comes from being bullied doesn't go away. It often actually just lingers. It feels so. It's You can't just take the bullying away. You also need to work on getting the self-esteem up, the love and belonging as such. So bullying, be mindful of this. You have to be very careful on this. We've unfortunately had a few situations of bullying very recently we had to step in on. And what is really good is, like, if you can get into a situation like with some of our kids, like in this situation, the girls being bullied, we already had really good conversations months before it really escalated into something bad, which allowed like the child to feel a little bit more safe when she actually felt like, okay, now this is overstepping that line. And I think if you can get to a situation where like what the relationship between your kids and the other kids are, then you're in a good spot. And then finally, like, you need a mise en place. So what is really interesting about, morbidly interesting about, like, unfortunately successful suicide attempts, is that quite a few of them happen impulsively. When you bring a group of people in front and you ask them, like, who has ever thought about like killing themselves or doing something silly around that self-harm, almost everybody will raise their hands. Like, it's apparently quite a normal thought to have. The difference is, though, it's like, is the stuff that allows you to act upon it available? There's a reason why suicides in the US are so high, is because they have guns. A lot of them have, and the risk of suicide increases by something like insane, like 25% or something like that, when you have a gun available, simply because the impulsivity of that happens. And that impulsivity isn't always like, oh, just an offhand thought. Sometimes it's because some really strong despair happened. Right? There's a reason why around deaths in the family, particularly to people close, there's a big ritual, like, around, like, how the whole society comes together. Simply because the emotion of despair is so strong that people have unfortunately ended their lives over it. There's Romance novels spoken about it. I mean, Romeo and Juliet is a very good example of this, right? So the example of, like, okay, simply because one thought that, and the poison was there, and then the knife was, basically that impulsivity can be a big thing. So what can you do is you can make sure that that impulsivity isn't available, which is why things like the hidden, if you live like on a high condo, for example, having the invisible grill there is really not a bad idea, for example. Now, that obviously isn't always available to everybody, but you can have a think, like, and this is something that you can just go online on. You could even, like, have, like, photos of your house, and you whack that into an AI and tell you, okay, what kind of dangers are here, and it will tell you. So then you can have a think about what that would look like. But you can also bring your kids involved with that. It's like, okay, like, why would we remove this? Because the discussion around why this particular thing could be potentially dangerous if you have a suicidal thought or a self-harm thought, then that on its own will make them stronger against those particular impulsive thoughts. And then not being judgmental about them is really important. It's like, yeah, everybody has these thoughts. How do you deal with it? So the issue isn't really these thoughts. The issue is, how do we help our kids, again, deal with the emotional distress that they're in? And this is, again, what in Passend in our class is what is so important, like teaching that emotional regulation that a lot of our gifted kids struggle with, even though it doesn't necessarily look like this. Particularly our girls do this. Let me see, the last bit that I want to say that is really important. Like, for those that don't know, there's this hotline called Befrienders. in Malaysia specifically. 0376272929. I don't like this number because it's it's a bit harder to remember, but basically, yeah, keep that one in mind. I want to leave it at this for tonight because this is a heavy topic. There is maybe some time for a few questions for those that want to. See if there's anybody that put anything in the chat here. There we go. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead. I'll just summarize what we have here for a second. Right, so we're here because some of the kids have been telling us that there's some thoughts that are going in their head, and I've been working with a lot of gifted kids, but no immediate panic. We're quite on top of this. We just want to steel you as a parent for these kind of things. Be mindful of the 3 paths of risk. So twice exceptionalism is one. Not all of you have twice exceptional kids, but the belonging and happiness is really deep part of this. So we have to be mindful of that. The perfectionism and the fear of failure are big triggers. And with all of this, gifted experiences towards the emotions are more intense. So they lead to a bigger highway. So imagine just like a big highway that a gifted kids is on. So they might get there a little bit quicker, right? So now what can we do to help? Skills-based therapy, keeping people busy with meaningful things. Make sure that they have agency in this. Family involvement. So make sure that you have your ways for them to share their deep thoughts and difficulties. Don't be judgmental, be supportive. Have a safety plan. So what things should you look for? Like what changes should you look for? And then if certain things are said, what are the next steps? Do you have a clinical psychologist that you trust? Do you have the numbers of the counselors in school? Like this, it's important that you involve us in this as well. So if you have anything here, you want to know anything more, please reach out to us. Bullying, like if your child is being bullied, but also if your kid is known to bully sometimes, you should look a little bit deeper into changing that behavior, but not by just forcing it away. We don't want to mask. We do not want them to mask. We want them to actually understand why it's a detrimental behavior in the long term and how it does matter, but what we think they do. And then mise en place, like how do you make your place safe? Like that's the important part there. I think that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for all your time. This recording will be on our website from tomorrow onwards. If you have any more questions, you can just share those questions with us in our Q&A sessions, in the forms that we have as parents enrolled with our program. And thank you again. Hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you.